Let's get started. Good evening, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining for this distinguished webinar series in AI and cybersecurity at the University of North Dakota. Today's distinguished speaker is Dr. Hanlin Lee. She's going to talk about data, labor, and labor force behind AI. Dr. Hanlin Lee is a postdoc scholar at UC Berkeley and an incoming assistant professor of UT Austin. Her research sits at the intersection of data governance and human-computer interaction. She examines the societal and economic impact of data generated by the public, from rating data to social media comments. Her research aims to inform policy and design interventions to incentivize responsible data collection and use. Lee publishes in ICWSM, ACM SHI, ACM CSW, and ACM FACCT. Her work has won an award at ACWSM and has been featured in national and international media outlets. With this, Dr. Lee, I'm so grateful for you agreeing to this talk and appreciate for your time and effort. And the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to give this talk. I very much look forward to the discussion after the talk. With that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. So feel free to shout out if you cannot see it. It seems to be working on my side. So thank you for the great introduction. I'm really my talk is going to be focusing on data labor and labor force behind AI. And in later of the talk, you will see what I define as data labor. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So full transparency, so I've been giving this talk a couple of times over the span of last 2 years. One of the interesting surprise to me that is because of the past news cycle, I've been updating a lot of my slides because a lot of this news around generative AI models have been great examples to prove the point that I was making with my dissertation research. So I wanted to start with this op-ed that's kind of fresh off the press. It's published this January. I write this with my colleague, Nick Vincent. In this op-ed at Wired, we made this argument that ChatGPT stole your work. So what are you going to do? Full credit to our editor, Angela Chen, who came up this very punchy title for us, much better than what we originally came up with. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to spend the first half talking about how my research shows that all these generative models, not just ChatGPT, but also a lot of other technology we use every day, are stealing our work. And then the second half of the talk, I'm going to dive into thinking about, as a data producer, what can you do to push it back against this status quo? So to save us some time, since I mentioned in my dissertation earlier, to save you some time of reading the over 100-page dissertation, I want to bring this point earlier, that the dissertation's argument I was making is that we're all moonlighting as data workers. And what do I mean by that? If we look into the generative AI model case, which is obviously which is right now at this moment is the most popular case that people are thinking about, these models don't exist in vacuum. By that, I mean, they're trained on a gigantic amount of training data. And these data sets are either artwork produced by artists who put on their public ArtStation profile to advance their career. They also train on books and publications from writers and scholars like us. So if ever published anything out there, then your content is very much likely being trained by for ChatGPT. Lastly, content from journalists, Wikipedia editors, basically a lot of online blogs as well, that have you ever written any content and put it on the web, it's very much likely that your content has been scraped and then used by OpenAI. And last but not least, code. Code is another way of open source developers have been contributing to ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot. By making their open source code, put it on GitHub, GitHub was able to use these code as training sets, and then we can see how ChatGPT is great for helping writing a function or helping us to learn Python. So all this to say, all this technology, all these models wouldn't exist without us constantly publishing, producing content online. And to put it in more concrete terms, so if we look at massive web, which is the training data set, primary data source for golfer, And if you look at what the primary sources of that, we can see Science Direct, which is a journal publication venue that has been the top one source for them. And if we look down the list, we will see Facebook as another primary source, Quora, academic.edu, basically reaffirming the case that if you're a scholar that has been made any public publications out there, your content is going to be end up in massive web and then end up being used to train golfer. On the right, we have the training data sets for Meta's Alpha large language model, and this is relatively new. And the text is a little bit small, but here you can see that basically, if you ever added Wikipedia, ever contributed to some volunteer projects like open subtitles, Hacker News, Reddit, or Push is also Reddit. So all of this content are going to be used for large language models. All right, taking a step back, we talked about generative AI models, like I said earlier, but this is not something that's new. This has been going on for decades. So there are systems that we use, we interact with every day, like search engines, recommender systems, machine learning predictions, even social media platforms. All of these public-facing technologies, they wouldn't exist without us contributing content and data. So to put into this diagram, we see that a lot of these systems, currently we see them as private property, created or belonging to these tech companies because that's their intellectual property. Of course, these systems wouldn't exist with tech companies spending investment and engineering hours on them. But on the other hand, we can also think of data producers contributing to these systems because without data producers' time, data, and knowledge, these systems wouldn't exist or wouldn't function as well. So all this is to say the success we see in lots of the public-facing technologies are possible thanks to both tech companies and data producers. Now, having made that case, but today's reality is that what is created out of this collaboration or these private-public endeavors is largely driven by companies' interests and motivations. By that, I mean, on data producer side, as a member of the public, we are interested in privacy and security, reliable information, autonomy, and in the gig economy case, fair wage for its workers. But on the other hand, companies have completely different incentives. They're interested in targeted advertising, user engagement, prediction, and optimization, and last but not least, profits. So we can see that there are value conflicts between these two types of entities. Now, over the years, we have seen a lot of researchers making progress on, for example, privacy and security, cybersecurity. So I'm really excited to see this webinar focusing on this topic. Now, but taking a step back, my research has been focusing on how can we find a general and pragmatic approach to address this value conflict between public-facing companies and data producers. Or put it another way, how can we think of an approach to make this collaborative this relationship between the two entities more collaborative and more equitable? Now, why am I interested in this direction? First of all, let's looking at recent news headlines. With the emergence of AI generative AI models, we have seen a lot of content producers are concerned about how their content is being reused. Well, we're very much impressed by how ChatGPT is functioning, how Dall-E is generating high quality images. For content producers who are producing content as their livelihood, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for them. This issue has been particularly prominent among programmers who write codes, artists whose work was used without their consent or even awareness by OpenAI to train GitHub Copilot and Dall-E. And most recently, we have also seen some publishers like Wall Street Journal having concerns about their articles written by their own journalists are being used to train these chatbots. So that's the recent news. But again, taking a step back here, this is some research I did, 4 years ago, can you imagine, in collaboration with the Mozilla Foundation. In that paper, we did a survey with international representative internet users in the US, not international. And we looked at how they are thinking about tech practices or prominent industry players' tech practices, business practices. And this survey, among 30% of them responded that they're protesting at least one prominent tech company. So we can see that these alarming numbers actually already showed an indication that people are really concerned about the way they're how these data-driven businesses work. And one of the particular reasons for people's interest against a lot of these practices is data monetization, in addition to privacy concerns, of course. So the first row highlighted here, these respondents are concerned about their content being used or digital traces being monetized. Respondents took really strong stances on this topic that mentioned that they are trying to control and profit from everything we do in life. And another respondent wrote, they sell my personal information, exploiting me, making profit off of me without giving me any financial share of their profit hierarchy. So that's a survey 4 years ago. We already see this trend where people were concerned about their extraction of their data, the monetization of their data. So this motivated me to explore how can we change the way the data is currently collected and used to by technology companies. So the creation of this collaboration, these public-facing technologies, can cater to both data producers' needs and interests rather than solely driven by corporate interests. So in my work, to kind of simplify the later argument I'm going to make, is that I reconceptualize all these contributions by data producers as data labor. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to make a case that if we adopt this labor lens, if we think about the way we produce data as a form of labor, we can leverage existing social theories and frameworks to democratize the governance of the user data and more broadly, data-driven public-facing technologies. All right, now, brought up this concept earlier, now to put it into more concrete terms, just to help us ground this conversation. So in my work, I define data labor as activities that lead to digital records that can improve a technology for the purpose of capital generation. Some examples would be including social media posts, blogs, and news articles, as I mentioned earlier. All of this content are not only helping the platform or to selling like more advertising, but they're also helping train all these generative AI models. Second is published artwork that's being trained for like generative art, content moderation, which is a case I'm going to unpack later, dive into. Personal preferences, like generating personal preferences to a recommender system that helps recommender system to recommend better content for you or better fit content for you. It also helps the platform to recruit more users and in turn getting more advertising revenue. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different ways that data labor can be used, can be monetized. Now, if you're familiar with the science and technology studies, you will see that a lot of the argument I'm making is standing on the shoulder of giants. So there's this definition, is extension of STS and data feminism scholars' work that describes how digital labor, basically participating in online communication, makes many of our commercial systems function. But also, I'm taking a step further here because many more activities are being used today without people's knowledge or awareness. It's going to be much more than supporting an online platform. It's also about the generative AI models, creating automation technologies. So I talk about this data labor concept, and in my work, we also thought to how can we characterize this type of activities, because you can tell it's a pretty big box. So in this manuscript that's currently under review, we created 5 dimensions that can characterize data labor. Now, for sake of the time today, I'm going to dive into one specific dimension, which is the dimension of visibility. Now, this dimension characterizes how visible is the capture of data labor publicly visible. Now, if we think about the visibility of the dimension, we can map different instances of data labor onto this spectrum. On the left side of the spectrum, which is invisible case, where we have generating personal preferences, because all this kind of information wouldn't be directly visible to public, or unless I work for the company, I would have no way accessing this information. And in the middle, we have content moderation, which is a little bit more complicated. It's some of them is visible because sometimes you would see a platform remove the comment and you would tell like, oh, there's something, the platform has intervened or someone has intervened and removed this comment. But a lot of the cases, as we'll talk about earlier, a lot of the work in content moderation is very much invisible. On the right hand, we have content production, and this will be mostly people, for example, putting out content out there either in the form of images or social media posts. And these are very much visible data labor because the capture of it is very straightforward as a reader of the web page. Now, one prominent example of visible data labor is actually rating production. To think about how we write ratings for Google Maps and Yelp. And these ratings are not only helping, for example, your neighbors to find out whether this restaurant is good or not, but they're also helping Google Maps and Yelp to train their recommender system to recommend their better restaurants for other users and increase user engagement. And at the same time, they're also useful in training semantic models, trying to detect, oh, how do I characterize the emotion in the sentence? And they also help them, of course, selling more advertising. And last but not least, if we think about Google Maps and Yelp, these content are also repackaged, and you will see them, for example, on Apple Maps, on Zillow, or on some other third-party websites that are paying a fee to Google Maps and Yelp to reuse the content. So as we can tell here, just like a single rating has a lot of ways to generate revenue for Google Maps, and Yelp, and many, many other entities. Now, visible data labor by nature is easy to study because we can, like as researchers, we can go online and scrape all these websites and understand what's going on, or having an idea of how valuable they are, what's the quality of them. But today I want to focus on like a more complicated case, which is content moderation. And why do I think that this is a valuable instance of data labor we should look at? So if you have interacted with online communities, you probably have also interacted or seen at least content moderators. They provide a valuable service to all these platforms, social platforms, small communities, and in some cases without compensation. So today we're going to focusing on Reddit, where Reddit is heavily reliant on volunteer content moderators. Reddit, similar to how Facebook groups would operate, basically a volunteer would stand up and say, "Oh, I want to moderate this community to keep the conversation civil or healthy." Now, if you're not Redditor, just to give some more insight here, Reddit is basically one of the most popularly visited websites in the US. And if you ever search something on Google search, a question on Google search, sometimes Google search will extract some snips of sentences from Reddit comments, just to show that how Reddit has been helpful in terms of not only to communities, the people in the communities, but also a lot of the Google search users. And even taking a step back, zooming out a little bit even further, Reddit has been really a primary source for a lot of the large data sets like Common Crawl. And then it ended up powering ChatGPT and GPT-4. So as we can tell, Reddit data sets are really influential. And because of that, we want to understand, well, Reddit content is influential, but also volunteer monitors playing a very critical role in maintaining this content. So how can we understand and measure this invisible data labor that is content, basically volunteer content moderation? So using Reddit content moderation as an example, I will provide two studies on this. In the first study, I talk about how valuable content moderation is, but for researchers, it's also very challenging topic for researchers to study, mainly because previously, researchers have been mostly focusing on content removal. For example, on Reddit, if you see a comment that has been removed by the moderator or by the platform, you will see like a tag that says removed, and you will not see the content of the comment. But so because of this like prominence of this feature, like you can tell the comment has been removed. A lot of researchers have been focusing on helping moderators, for example, how to like remove harmful content faster, how to delete harmful speech more accurately. But some recent research or quality research has shown that content moderation is much more than content removal, which is why it's somewhat invisible and complicated. So I put up some citations here if you're interested in taking a look. But basically, the point here is that without accounting for all the content moderation activities that's happening on Reddit, we would risk undervaluing and under-supporting this vital data labor. So because of this challenge in terms of invisibility we have sensed from previous qualitative research, we sought to study the works that has fallen through the cracks of the previous works that have been focusing on content removal. In addition to content removal, what other work moderators has been doing on this platform? So working with Reddit moderators, we collected private mod logs. We collected these data sets from their communities. And these mod logs are a feature that is provided by Reddit. It would log basically every action the moderator in the subreddit or in the community have taken in the past. So these are, for example, on the first line here, we can see that a few minutes ago, this moderator banned the user. So as you can tell here, these are all private. That as a community member, I would not have access to this information, but it's available to all the moderators. As you can tell, these are highly sensitive information. And the way we, well, I don't have that slide, but I will quickly go through this. The way we collected this information is that we built a bot and we reached out to individual moderators and asking them if they're willing to donate their private mod logs for our research study, and nobody else would have access to these mod logs except our research team. In the end, we actually also worked with them and discussed how do we anonymize this data to protect their identity, because moderators are very much subject to online harassment in online communities. So through this data collection process, we collected 42 subreddits on our own. And some of these subreddits are quite large. They have millions of subscribers. We also included 84 subreddits that are from a public data source called public mod logs. So in the end, we have over 100 subreddits with a wide range of number of subscribers, ranging from 5 million to 3,000. And they also cover a diversity of topics, including politics, news, humor, and gaming. So reminder earlier that I talked about the invisibility of content moderation. And our finding using these mod logs actually reaffirmed the previous qualitative finding about the invisibility of their work. So here I plotted the top 5 subreddits in our data set. And we see in all cases, invisible data labor, which is the purple block, accounts for a substantial percentage of the overall labor going into these communities. Now, invisible labor in this case means a wide range of activities like approving content, because as a community member, you would not see whether this comment or content has been gone through an approval process. It also means that, for example, banning users, because these actions are not publicly visible. So we can see here, based on this graph, that accounting for only visible activities drastically underestimates the amount of data labor that's going into these online communities. Now we talk about a way to understand this complicated invisible data labor, but now let's look, how can we measure it? Before we jump into measurement, I want to talk about why do I think measurement in this specific case is important. So as talked about earlier, we see this tension often in companies, this tension between companies and data producers. And in the Reddit case, it's especially prominent. As Reddit expands its business across the globe, it becomes apparent that moderators' needs and goals do not always align with the platform's purposes. Example here would be, for example, in some of the mod support subreddits, we would often see a moderator reaching out to the Reddit employee, talking about how the platform should intervene or helping them to remove hate speech comments. Then they have been facing lack of support from Reddit employees, basically. And this post resonated with over 100 moderators who have had similar experiences. Other than the lack of support that volunteer moderators have been facing with, they have also protested Reddit decisions, particularly around platform policies and hiring decisions. So we can see that mods often are having disagreement with companies' practices. Now, in all of these cases, that's the problem that I've talked about earlier, the value conflicts between companies and data producers, in this case, volunteer moderators. So to empower data volunteer moderators, we need empirical knowledge about the values they bring to Reddit. To put it another way, what's the potential leverage they have over Reddit? So in this case, I asked, what is the monetary value volunteer moderators bring to Reddit? I'm gonna skip through some slides because I know I'm running over time. I tend to go overboard with my deck of slides. But basically, to give an overview, that to measure the monetary value of volunteer moderators' labor, we need to first estimate labor hours they have contributed. Basically, how much time do they spend on moderating? Here, we took a quantitative approach and leveraged this private monologue data you have seen earlier and used a statistical model. So first, we start to estimate the labor hours that they contributed. To assess the moderation duration or how much time is spent on moderating, we took an approach that has been previously used in Wikipedia session analysis. Basically, based on the log data, we inferred, well, how many minutes did this moderator work on this subreddit to this day? We got the average, and we see a very long tail distribution, which is not surprising. And this is typically how a lot of online participation works on Wikipedia, on other online communities. This means that a small portion of moderators contributed the bulk of the work. One thing that's worth calling out here is that our private monologue log data gives us a lower bound estimate. By this, I mean there are actually there's some activities that are not captured in these small log data sets. This would be, for example, if you have moderated Reddit before with the team. So this is very common where moderators would have their own like group chat on either WhatsApp or sometimes Slack or Discord, where they deliberate whether, oh, like, what do you think about, should we remove this comment? Or what about think this community rule we established 3 months ago, should we update the rule? So a lot of these kind of private interactions are not captured in the monologue data. So this means that while the monologue data has been very comprehensive in capturing all of the Reddit moderators' actions taking on the platform, we're losing some information that's some kind of digital traces that are happening off Reddit. So that's why it's a lower bound estimate, and that's something to keep in mind as you interpret the numbers. So as I mentioned earlier, we use this monologue, we assessed how many minutes each moderator spent on the platform. We regressed their daily moderation duration time onto public available subreddit and moderator activity metrics, such as like number of comments on Reddit or how long this moderator account has been around. So using this model, in our sample, we have roughly 400 active moderators, and they work 16 hours every day. And extrapolating this model to the whole moderator population, which we estimated to be around 11,000, the whole population worked 466 hours every day. So we have these labor hours. We know how much time they spend on moderating. And we want to know what's their market rate. One thing that's a little bit challenging here is that when we think about volunteer work, we don't always have wage data. But fortunately, in the content moderation case, there's a large crowdsourcing marketplace that people are like requesters or employers basically are looking for commercial content moderators. A platform that people like hiring commercial content moderators is Upwork. So on Upwork, some examples would be someone would post, for example, I need someone to manage my Facebook group, and then a worker would apply to the job. So this worker would be often around playing the role of content moderator. Of course, at a higher, like the granular level, we would see like, oh, Facebook might be having different type of like moderation tools. But at a higher level, these type of roles, like commercial content moderators, have very similar activities and goals with volunteer content moderators. So the rate we collected from Upwork can be a reasonable proxy for us to think about what's the value of these volunteer labor hours. Here we collected 160 Upworkers from the platform, and 31 of them are in the US. So they have a higher median wage, which is $20 an hour. In the Philippines, which is happens to be a country where YouTube, Twitter outsource their commercial content moderators. That's the reason that there are a lot of commercial content moderators on Upwork, that their median rate is much lower. It's $6 an hour. And the global median rate is $10 an hour. So reminder that the 466 hours every day we estimated, the value of these labor hours is going to be dependent on what market rate we use. Here I want to call out the US median, since that's where we are right now, where if we consider the hourly rate of $20 an hour, so this labor hours that volunteer moderators contribute would be worth $3.4 million per year. And that's 3% of the Reddit advertising revenue. So as a reminder, this is lower bound estimate. Now, after publishing this work, we have got quite some more public engagement. Here are some articles. One of them in German, is a language I do not understand, that they have been giving a great overview of this paper if you're interested. So we have this number. We know in the case of Reddit, how much work people are contributing, but zooming out a bit, if we think about like all the different ways that we're volunteering for these companies, well, even if we have the number, how do we use this number? What are the next steps we can take? As promised, this is going to be the second part of my talk. Reflecting on the survey that I mentioned earlier, in that survey, we asked how people have been protesting a prominent tech company. A lot of them mentioned stopping use digital products or services altogether, but that's not always possible. Some of them sought to preserve their data or preserve their privacy by using ad blocking, private browsing, or fake data or accounts. So these are all different ways that people are already taking action around. In our work, we created this proof of concept study, thinking about, well, how can we bring these actions that are happening in silos into a form of collective action? So we developed a browser extension that's called out of sight, and upon installation, users can choose which companies they would like to boycott or protest. And then the browser extension will remove all these companies' affiliate links and content directly from their webpage. An example of this would be search engines. For example, in this case, the extension will remove all Amazon affiliated links from search engine result pages, so you won't even see them in the first place. One thing we paid special attention to here is that, as mentioned earlier, we want to create a collective experience. So we looked into previous work or series on collective action, and we provided group progress, meaning that the number of participants who were involved in the similar protests with you, or the potential economic impact that you all have been contributing to this protest. So this feature has been really resonated with a lot of participants, where they commented that people are making progress. They can see people are making progress. The effects of economic boycotts in real life aren't often immediately visible, and this could make impact visible. So I quickly walk through that proof of concept study. And one thing we need to remember that that is a very small study, thinking with 60 participants. But if we were to scale up, how can we know what are the parameters that we need to consider in organizing such collective action? So in collaboration with my colleague Nick Vincent, who I've mentioned earlier, that we developed this framework of data leverage. So data leverage describes the ways that, as a data producer, what are the potential opportunities for me to influence the behavior of a tech company. One example would be data strikes, withholding all of your content and data from a specific company, so your content wouldn't be vacuumed up or wouldn't be reused by this company. There are already some tools that are existing out there that if you're interested in engaging with data strikes. One of them is GitHub. If you're an open source contributor, you have a GitHub Copilot account. BigCode has this "Am I in the stack" feature to allow opting out from the model developed by Hugging Face. I would not recommend it, because I do think Hugging Face has a better operation model than some of the other AI firms. But if you're an artist, you can go check out the Have I Been Trained website to opt out of your artwork. And if you host your own website, robust.txt is going to be the file you want to use to deter some web crawlers, so your content wouldn't be scraped by these crawlers. So data striking is one way. Another way is data poisoning, which is essentially making your data worse for the purpose of the tech companies. And an example of this, I think go to the next slide. An example of this, and this is very recent, that a team of researchers at University of Chicago deployed a system called Glaze, and would help prevent AI models from learning artists' personal styles by manipulating some pixels in the artwork that is barely visible to human eyes. Now, there are different ways that we as individuals can think about how to engage with this type of collective action, how to think about how to have better control over our content. But a lot of us don't have the time and energy to think of, like, to go to each website to, hey, take down this content of mine. So now it's also the time to take a step back, thinking about how can we build a future that prioritizes data producers' interests. What are the shared principles and values might this future uphold? So as I talked about earlier, currently there's a very one-sided relationship, partially because of the decision-making power around data is highly concentrated to a few players that are public-facing tech companies. One of the potential ways to push back against this status quo is to create a mechanism where we can collectively decide how to value and use data as a public good. So think about a status quo where data is largely stored, accessed, and capitalized by companies for commercial purposes, either predictive modeling, ad targeting, and so on. But if we can change this model, think about how can we treat data as the outcome of social collective labor, so data stakeholders or producers have a say in how data is valued and used as public good to potentially inform, for example, have better knowledge commons or better cities. Now, to get there, I think the first step is that we need to understand what's a fair value exchange between data producers and tech companies. The case that I mentioned earlier about Reddit gives a very specific case about how the value of volunteer moderator or volunteer data labor that has been going into Reddit. But currently, in a lot of the other relationships or other systems, there exists information asymmetry between companies and data producers. While companies know very well how your data can be monetized and worth of this data, the public has no way, or as data producer, I have no way of accessing this information. So I think one of the important directions for research is to understand the value that data producers have been providing, and then we can have a meaningful, well-informed discussion around what's a fair value exchange between the two entities. We can think about how we all get free emails. At the same time, all the email content that have been written are also accessed by Google, and they can assess their email behaviors, and they can use it for their monitoring or commercial purposes. But for us, there's no way to know, well, how valuable my email information is actually to Google. And once we have this information, then we can, for example, maybe do some public polling or understanding how people perceive this value and how can we create a more a fair relationship transaction between the two entities. So moving forward, I think there's also another research direction I think that's valuable is to think about how can we create an environment and create a valuable opportunity for researchers, industry leaders, practitioners to create a more democratic data governance paradigm. So the consensus right now is that not just a few key players can have a say on how data is used, but we all should take part in it too. So that's some of the, I think, broader direction that the question we need to think about today before our data become more and more centralized, become more and more valuable to these few players. And this is the urgent question to address. And addressing this information asymmetry around like how content and how to make decisions around data also has practical implications. Because in the recent case, the few lawsuits I've mentioned earlier, and also in the Shutterstock case, where we can see that artists, content producers, writers, and programmers, they're really concerned about the reuse of their content. And because of this concern, I think it's also an opportunity for us to think about what falls under fair use from a content producer's perspective. I think the time is really, since all this conversation are already happening, so the time is right for researchers to start engage with different approaches to assessing content producers' rights and perspectives more deeply. So in this direction, we have me and my team have been thinking about how can we understand what falls under fair use, and this is a really preliminary work. So I'm just going to throw up some like high level points here. So we're thinking about, well, how would content producers react when their work can be or potentially be replaced by generative AI models? Some of them a lot of the online discourses, we script some online discourses, and in these online discourses, we see that people are concerned about the devaluing of human labor. Basically, a lot of the content production requires years of training, and the emergence of these models essentially are devaluing the training, the efforts they have been spending in getting the status they are today. There's also the concern about displacing labor, which is job loss. More recently, I think I came across this news that Levi's, the jean company, is partnering with an AI firm to use their AI technology to supplement or to create images of diverse models wearing their clothes. And this has been hugely controversial in terms of how models are going to be having fewer job opportunities, especially people of color who are particularly or particularly vulnerable to this type of automation. And in last category, we have lack of control, which is essentially content producers losing control over your content or your data or their digital traces. So one thing, I know I have 5 minutes left. One thing that I do want to touch on is that we talk about there are different ways for us as individuals to push back against this status quo. But it's also higher level, like how as a community we can create, how can we create a stewardship that is feasible in ensuring responsible innovation? One approach that I've been engaging with is responsible AI licenses. And if you're interested, we're actually very much open to community participation. So everyone can join our Slack channel and learn about what has been going on and help to contribute if there's anything interesting to you. But to give an overview of this initiative, so the whole point is to think about how can we give developers and data producers more control over the artifacts or the models, data sets they're producing. Thinking about in open source case, often developers put their model open source technology out there and anyone can have access to it, anyone can use it. But that has been causing troubles, as we can tell, like deepfakes, misinformation, all that we can see. So I've been thinking about how can we attach behavioral licenses to a model. Thinking about, for example, you cannot, a model that say a clause that's saying that you cannot use this for example, surveillance, or you cannot use this for any privacy risks, or you cannot use this on people below 16 years old. So in this way, we're hoping to, this framework would be giving developers some sort of saying in terms of how their contribution can be used and what the population, or in what context this technology is applicable. And we have been gaining traction, and for example, some of the Hugging Face developers have been developing and writing licenses that is under the responsible AI licenses. So if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look. And there's also some other initiatives or form of data stewardship that, based on my understanding, that has been largely operating at a conceptual level, but I do think they're promising. An example would be data dividends, data cooperative, data trust, data stations, and data intermediaries. A lot of these are thinking about how can we create some sort of third-party entities that manage and govern data as a public resource, rather than right now where this public resource is largely captured or collected or managed by tech companies. So wrapping up the talk, I think in the whole, hopefully by this point, I have convinced you that public-facing technology is a public good, and we all should have a say in it because we're all contributing to it. But the real question, challenging part for me is that how can we operationalize this? And this is the research direction that my group we have been really looking into and thinking about. Now, to really wrap up, just like a lot of the technologies that I talk about wouldn't exist without all of us as data producers. All of my research wouldn't have been possible without all of my collaborators, mentors, undergrad researchers, including my advisors at Northwestern and University of Minnesota. And now I'm ready for questions. And here, just a quick reminder that in the study I just talked about earlier, the case of Reddit, where Reddit volunteer moderators are contributing at minimum $388 an hour. This is the time we're sitting here. Now, okay, I think that's the end of my talk, and I'm ready for questions.
First of all, thank you so much for shedding light on this relationship between data producers and the companies. It's very exciting to see how we are going forward in this direction. So, well, while we wait for questions, maybe I'll start with a couple of questions. The first is, okay, you mentioned there are a lot of invisible, data labor. There are a lot of, so how do you see the content moderators, from the data producer world? Do you see on any types of validation framework, who could be moderators? How do we know? Data removal is one thing, and I'm trying to. There's so many moderators out there, and as we scale the network, or the framework that you talk about in terms of crowdsourcing and looking at this moderators, are there any work focused on validating who could be the moderator, or right now focus is actually how we can able to engage more participation from moderators?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the volunteer moderators case, where we do have some sense of there has been other researches done on this topic, thinking about who are actually the people who have the free time to moderate and spending hours and hours every week to talk to others and to moderate this online community. And it's not surprising that a lot of these communities are moderated by people who are much more high or higher or with a higher education degree, and because they have the free time and they have the availability to participate. But I also think this question speaks to the much broader picture around digital divide, where the people who are contributing data today to Wikipedia, to having the time to write online blogs, are mostly people who are having a higher income, have the free time, have the bandwidth to take care of all these tasks, to spend time online. So one of the arguments is thinking about how can we compensate people for their contribution. This is something really important to consider, that if we were really to compensate people for all this kind of volunteer content or even passively contributed content, then are we exacerbating the income gap between the people who have the time online and the people who don't have the time to go online because they're working 2 or 3 jobs every day? So that's something I think really worth considering, thinking about if we were to compensate people for their content or for the data, how can we do it in a way that we don't reward the top 1% disproportionately?
Great. We have a question on chat. How do issues of bias and ethics impact fair data exchange?
Yeah, I think I can talk about this a little bit more. So I think I'm assuming the fair data exchange will be just the transaction between data producer and the company. So one thing that kind of building on the earlier point about the digital divide is that, there's a lot of conversation about how large language models or machine learning models are exacerbating existing human biases, because the data set, unsurprisingly, is very much dominated by certain demographics. One thing that I think is really promising that we have seen over the years, that researchers have been thinking about how can we create different metrics to assess fairness, how can we detect bias by engaging with having a more diverse set of data producers or having a diverse set of stakeholders involved in the design of these models. So so these are some really, I think this has been really some meaningful progress made in these different fronts. So I'm happy to, I think the ACM Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference will be really the venue to have a lot of these publications if you're interested in reading more about this type of research.
Good. Since we have more students participating across multiple universities, what are those futuristic research problems that you think in this type of domain that you want to give some insight?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I'm starting my faculty job at UT Austin in a few months. One thing that I think I'm really excited to working on this is that first of all, how do people, so right now we have this dynamic of companies vacuuming up the content without compensation, without a cost to them. So the one thing I'm thinking about is that, how can we understand how people are valuing this content. For example, how would an artist, if we were to go, for example, ask an artist, like, hey, I see this image on your portfolio, and how much are you willing to accept to let me use your content for a training, for training a model? So this is very much going into like an economics or behavior experiment, thinking about, well, like like right now we think of OpenAI as collecting all their data sets for free, but they're not free. There is a cost. The cost is just the content producers are bearing this cost. And how can we measure this cost is a really direction that I'm looking forward to moving forward. And another case of this, I think, is another direction about this is thinking about how we think about the broader impact of technology. They're having a lot of discussion around like bias and this negative impact of machine learning models. But another case I can think of, like, for example, the Levi's case, where they are using AI to replace human labor. So this is causing material harm to the labor force. And how can we think about, how can we measure this type of harm? So that's another research direction that I'm, a more broader direction that I'm thinking about going forward.
These are very valid research problems. And I think, we have another question. Do you believe it is a situation of attribution versus compensation?
I love that question. I thought about that a lot. One of the studies that I'm running right now is thinking of like understanding when should attribution occur, when do content producers think that they should attribute it, should receive attribution or receive some credit. But the complication here is that when we think about like journey, like this is the case for lots of platforms where we're already seeing attribution. For example, if an artwork is reshared on some social platforms, you will see like in lots of cases, people would credit the original artist. But the challenge with generative models is that this is not always possible or is not always easily understandable. For like the end audience, if you use Dall-E to generate an artwork, we think about like all the training images this artwork are relied on. Even if I give you, for example, information about like this image is trained on 100 artists' work, it's pretty meaningless as the audience, because I would not have the time to like look into like, oh, what this artist is doing. For the artist, it's also meaningless because it doesn't give them much like really a credit, because if they're not getting any audience from this generative arts, then they're not actually receiving any attribution. So I think the attribution is really I think it's something that's worth pursuing, but I really don't think it's addressed the root of the problem in the case of generative models.
Good. Let's see. Nirup, do you see any other questions from your end?
No,
I think no.
Okay.
Pretty clear.
Well, great.
I do have
you have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Dr. Lee, so could you speak a little bit about what sort of role can machine learning and artificial intelligence play in protecting against data poisoning attacks?
Yeah, I kind of skipped through that slide, but I actually have a lot of content there. So in the case of data poisoning, I mean, I'm sure my colleague who is leading that work, Nick Vincent, will have a lot more like thoughtful answers to that. But just to give my 2 cents on this topic, is that, well, data poisoning, if you think about it, it's very much like adversarial attacks to machine learning models. And that's some like machine learning researchers have been working, spending a lot of efforts thinking about how to make their models more robust to this attack. One thing, well, I think there's definitely like these overlaps, like the tactics are very similar. But I do think in the case of, in some cases, I think we can think of them as this data goes stale, meaning that, well, actually, like your information is not going to be much meaningful 3 years from now to these models. So that's something that I think is really a data poisoning attackers could think about, like how they can, for example, disguise their data as in like submitting stale data or data from 3 years ago to confuse these systems. But I will say there's definitely overlap between these two types of tactics. I think the other part of it is also the transparency of the motivation. If we think about the adversarial attacks, a lot of these attackers sometimes like have like antisocial purposes. And I think this is the area where we really need to identify, like, well, the person is doing the tag and inferring what's this person's purpose. But I agree with you. It's definitely like two sides of the same coin.
Nirup, I think I saw some question pop up. I'm not sure. Do you see it on your end?
Yep,
I think I saw it on the chat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if
I can read it out
compensation,
loud.
yeah, I can do that, Dr. Lee. If compensation is the goal, what are your thoughts on how this distributed system would compensate potentially millions of individuals? We do have precedent with the music industry, but it is a more mature model.
Yeah, I always say the music industry. This is a great question again. So from Bill again. So I always say like the music industry has been something that we have been heavily like relying on, like helping to like think about like what are the ways that we can build an infrastructure where we can reward content producers for their work. But like then it will be like very micro payment every time. So one thing I think that this like one type of approach to this would be in terms of redistribution could be the music industry. Another type of approach we have been thinking about is about how can we fund third-party entities that are governing or like are having this responsibility to govern all of our data. So thinking about this is like some of the examples, conceptual ideas that people have been playing around. For example, data stations or data intermediaries are some like frameworks people have come up with, where, for example, a data intermediary would collect all of everyone's data contribution, and this intermediary would getting fund for or getting revenue from companies using their data sets. So that's another way of functioning, but I'm also realizing, saying this out loud, I'm also realizing it's very similar to the music industry framework or infrastructure. So I think this is definitely like a very complicated system design problem that needs a lot more work on this as well. I think a lot of the ideas on this has been, the ones I have read about it has been really conceptual, and I really look forward to seeing more work on this. Like, what are the concrete design choices we need to make in this challenge?
Great. What can we do, Dr. Lee, to help promote this so-called framework that you talk about? Should we make this available in our website or some kind of way to promote this? The whole thing. The interesting thing about is the public good, right? We are trying to. You talk about those two buckets called smart cities and digital commons, and I think that is the bucket that is going to be enabling a game changer to make sure that we can. Have an oversight of these moderators to make sure that the digital harm is not done to societies, or doesn't propagate to, So if you want us to promote anything, let me know. We can able to put a link or whatever you prefer, and I would be happy to do so. Yeah.
Absolutely, I appreciate that offer. I think like having me here is really great. I really enjoyed having this conversation, answering these questions, and getting some ideas of like what actually people think about like are the primary challenges in addressing this problem. Other than that, I think for all of us, I think part of it this is the public awareness, this is a public awareness challenge as well. Because I think 5 years ago when we started this research, a lot of the questions were around like, well, people get free products and services. Well, why would they want to get money out of it? Because they're already getting a good deal out of it. But I think as tech innovations happen over the years, especially in the last year with generative AI models, so all these are great examples of showing like why we should start caring about like our content or our data is being vacuumed up by a few players without our awareness. So I think this is something like just like thinking about like different ways that you're volunteering and different ways that you're helping to make corporate profits are really great ways to start helping everyone to think about like what are the solutions we would want in the future. So I really I think having this talk is a great opportunity for this. And then if there is any feel free to reach out to me. I have my email and my website and my Twitter handler if anyone's interested in having more conversation or thinking about having any research ideas, thinking about what are the really meaningful ways we can mitigate the problem.
Sure, we'll be in touch for working together. Yeah. With this interest of time, I think I appreciate Dr. Lee for her effort, and thank you so much again for your time. And we will be sending you plaque and a certificate signed by our dean. And we'll also make this recording available on our website and share you the link so you can also promote or use in your website. And could you also share a copy of the slides if possible, so we can also make it available on our website? So for anybody who wants to have that another version of it, so if they want to do that. So if
sure.
you're okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. You have a nice day.
Thank you for having me. Have a good one.